from my immediate left here. Over here we have Vernard James, and Vernard is a young local filmmaker who graduated from DeSales University. He had a couple works that won the prestigious Duffy Award for Best Overall Film 2 years in a row at DeSales. And he loves to write, direct, and edit films and volunteer at his church. So welcome, Vernard James. To his left, we have Andrew McIntosh. If you got here early and you heard him spinning records, he goes by DJ Arm18 as well. But besides his skills on the turntable, he is a professor of sociology at Northampton Community College, the Monroe campus. His philosophy is each one, teach one. And he's also taught at Lehigh. And he has done so much for the culture around the Lehigh Valley. Recently, earlier this year, he brought Chuck D to the campus of Northampton Community College, gave an amazing speech. He brought the Cold Crush Brothers here, and we did a showing of Wild Style, and I can go on and on. But welcome, Andrew McIntosh. Thank you. And to his left, we have Ali Akarcesme. He is a professor at Kutztown University. He's produced and directed socially conscious TV documentaries, short narrative films. His film Departures led him to win Best Drama and Best Director in New York, the prestigious film festival in New York. And we're thrilled to have him. He's a professor of film studies at Kutztown. So welcome, Ali. And then we had met Boogie earlier. Boogie was also a sociology major back at Rider University, which is where me, Boogie, and Dinah Wright had met. And we've stayed great friends all this time. So Boogie will be moderating the panel.
Thank you, JB. So we've heard our introductions of our panelists. We're going to just kind of jump right into it. And we're going to kind of have a bit of a conversation. So I'm just going to throw a question out there. One of the topics that this film talks about is systemic inequality. So pose this: how does the film portray systemic inequalities affecting Black communities in South Central Los Angeles? What specific institutions, including education, policing, healthcare, are highlighted as contributing to these inequalities? And I'm just gonna go from from my right to left. So I'm gonna start off with you, Bernard.
I think it's on. Okay. First, thanks for having me. But yeah, I mean, LA is a character in this movie. Like it's living and breathing, and so every character is like interacting with this thing, and there's a character in and of itself, and everyone you see, for better or worse, is a product of just the kind of the urban decay that is allowed to go on in South Central. And I mean, systemic, you just see, I think one of the really cool things they show is, well, maybe not cool, but like, one of the details is like how when they're taking the SAT, like all the characters or all the people taking the test are like minorities, while the administrators are the only white ones in the room. I thought that was interesting. And then obviously you have a more like example, like the cop who hates his own kind so much. It's just coming out of him how much he hates where he is and what he does and everything about it. And he's decided to take on this power trip job. So
I really like what you're saying about LA as a character. I was thinking as I was watching it, some of the old school films we've shown that you guys have put on, Wild Style, Crush Groove, Juice, they were all in New York City, and they were in Gotham, the metropolis. And then we watched House Party, which begins to have this suburban vibe. And the striking thing about South Central is that in a lot of ways it's laid out like the suburbs, but all of the things that you're speaking about, Bernard spoke about, there's these elements of systemic racism present most clearly in that moment where Furious talks about gentrification and why is it that our hood is being depleted, purposely like ruined and then bought out and flipped. Really striking that that's talked about in 1991, as we know that's very much plagued many of our cities in the last 20 years.
I think for me, it's the establishment and the contrast of three main characters from the writing perspective, as Trey, Ricky, and Doughboy. In terms of the fate of what really happened to them, what they're really pursuing, like, Ricky's situation with the education and SAT, versus the only one that seems to be having the survival as the Trey character, and there are different reasons in terms of his family atmosphere, having a single father, having the father present with him at all times, versus Doughboy. So there's a lot going on in terms of that, aside from what everybody else said, with especially the African American cop over there, the internalized racism that was part of it, and the rest. I think the first thing that really struck me, I guess, was these three different characters and their establishment in terms of the writing structure and what really happened to them and how they responded to these tragic events or incidents.
Thank you. So, in your responses, we actually touched on a few of the other topics that I have here. So you're just gonna go right into those as well. So we mentioned family and masculinity. So what roles do fathers play in shaping the characters, especially Trey? We kind of touched on that a little bit. And how does Trey's relationship with his father, Furious Styles, contrast with other young men's experiences in the community?
Okay. I guess it really, Trey's interactions with his father was really interesting for me as a parent myself, I guess. The presence of him being in there, despite the fact that, mother and father was divorced. And you actually compare that with Doughboy and what's really happening with Ricky, where, the single mother is in the picture, but, the father figure is not there. So I guess that really plays a major role in terms of helping Trey to say, let me out in that car scene, right? That's a really big moment in the film that helps him, I guess, be more fortunate in terms of having him better opportunities to navigate compared to the other two in that regard. Although they also focus on the idea of education in that film. So the presence of father figure is, as a male role model, helps him, navigate through this struggle and survival, I guess.
I read that Singleton wrote that Furious Styles character almost like based on his relationship with his father, and that was very influential in his life. And I have to admit that it was, this is the first time I've seen it since it came out in 91. And it was driving me crazy when I was, whatever I was at that time, 16, 17. I didn't notice it at all, but it was driving me crazy that the mothers were portrayed so negatively, right? Doughboy and Chris's mother, is picking favorites. The other mother we see is a crackhead. Until the moment at the cafe, and Angela Bassett's character gets to sort of set Furious straight and say, you're not doing anything that you should be doing, and that mothers have always been doing. And so I was almost like relieved that Singleton remembered, like, okay, we need some sort of pushing back and forth. But no doubt, it seemed like a really burning, important piece of this movie was to place fathers in a role of responsibility and how important that is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I could be wrong, but I believe the only other father you see is Ricky, obviously with his infant. And there's obviously just something about the contrast between seeing Furious and then his son, his relationship with his young father who, is really just trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what he's going to do. He knows that he's going to do something, but he just doesn't know exactly what. And then, of course, he's the one who is caught in the crossfire, something that really has nothing to do with. So yeah, I think this is the first time I've seen this in a while. As I was being bored, but sorry, but yeah, I mean the intentionality of John Singleton just with the characterizations is so like it's right there and it's beautiful.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed was the how Ricky's character was taken out in the film. It left his son without a father, so it's like the continuation of a cycle.
Right.
And kind of, I think that was intentional as well for him to put that in there, saying that once the father is erased, his son is going to probably go down that same path, unfortunately. Which kind of brings us to our next topic. How does Singleton explore the roots and impacts of gang violence on both individuals and the community as a whole?
That the movie, it just speaks for itself. It was so iconic in its portrayals of gang violence, and obviously it led to a string of films throughout the 90s by Singleton and other directors that highlighted a lot of that just senseless, almost systemic violence that just plagues the streets, and it's brutal and it's random. And I think that's the scariest part, is that it's random. Those dudes really had no. I think they're supposed to be Bloods, and it's kind of like they're against Ice Cube, who's maybe Crip affiliated, but regardless, there was nothing that set any of that off. Like it was just random, and yet it led to everything that happened. And yeah,
Chris was wearing a blue jacket when he bumped into him.
Yeah. So
I think you're right. Like they got the red car, the Bulls.
Also, yeah, and the cop did say like you look like Crenshaw. Yeah, so Crenshaw Mafia. Yeah. So that checks out. So I mean, just clothing,
It's bothersome how matter of fact it is, and a testament to I think sometimes good art makes you very uncomfortable. How I found myself. Ice Cube in particular, but just all of his friends. Like, as matter of fact as their violence is, the outright misogyny, etc., is so casual, and yet there's something kind of endearing between all of them. Like, you get this sense that they're a brotherhood bound by that violence, and as you say, this becomes very influential in a lot of films that roll out in the 90s. But I think that's the first time you've seen. The last time in my memory, my understanding that you see kind of like black characters involved in this kind of gangsterism, whatever, if that's lack of a better word, is in blaxploitation flicks in the 70s. And those can be very cartoonish. I mean, they serve a certain purpose. But this was just, these were kids. Like, I mean, they're in high school. And I think that's the part that I was really very settling for me.
I mean, where should I start? I think the scene with the billboard, right, where Lawrence Fishburne character is talking about gentrification, also deals with this in terms of what's happening in the corner of the neighborhoods with liquor stores and having access to guns, and all of those things are definitely there. That's a very, very important scene, I think. And we could cover different things by analyzing that particular scene over there. It's interesting that the film starts with the stop sign. Have you guys noticed that? It starts with the stop sign. There's like a big focus light. It's almost like the filmmaker, John Singleton, is showing that in our eyes. And I noticed that when I was watching it this time, there are other moments in the film where they focus on the stop sign. I don't know, you could read it in different ways, but it's like about the lack of opportunities. What is it? You got to be an athlete or a rapper to be really successful. And think about what Ricky was going through with SAT and education. Looking at the ads of the army, the military, there are a lot of things. This film is really deep, guys. It's really deep.
Yeah, so once again, we're kind of touching on some of the other topics that I have. So let's just kind of, let's talk about gentrification. since that's the one that keeps coming up. This for many was probably the first time that the term was used in a film, and it was introduced by Lawrence Fishburne's character, Furious Styles. How does that resonate with you? And have you seen this around your communities? And do you have some examples? I mean, for myself, my cell phone is always going off with somebody trying to buy my house. I live in North New Jersey, in the middle of the hood, for those who want to know. But my phone is always going off with someone trying to buy my house. So I know exactly what he was talking about with that. You know, we buy houses for cash.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Allentown, born and raised. And it's funny, like the first time I saw this, I must have been in high school, and I didn't really know what gentrification was. Like, I'd heard the word, but I didn't really have an understanding. And now, as soon as I even hear that word, I think it's 7th Street in Allentown, in the way that they entirely gentrified, you know, that area with the PPL Center and the new apartments and everything. And I remember my friends were joking about it. They were like, you know, there was a time not too long ago where you could not walk down these streets like past a certain hour, and now it's like live and hopping and everything's going on. And it's right in front of us, you know. It's and not just Allentown, but all over the valley. There's aspects of it.
It's accessible to only those who have the means, right? We didn't solve any of those problems that made those streets dangerous right on 7th Street, but it sure looks nice. My issue, like the thing about gentrification and redlining, as someone who teaches intro to sociology in a class on American history and race, my humble opinion is the great gains that were made by the civil rights movement and the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Law very much has made the America that we have experienced over the last 50 plus years, that the gains that we've had, the way in which, you know, look at this panel, right? Like just a variety of different people coming together was in large part because of those efforts. It also can be true that redlining and gentrification practices systematically and purposely, if you will, de-invested in particular Black communities. And so the gains that we may have made socially and culturally were not made materially. And that is generational. And I think that's a big part of this movie that he's tackling that certainly went over my head when I was 16 and I was like just fascinated with Cube and, you know, the hip hop soundtrack, was Singleton is really explaining how this, you know, South Central, these communities may look like suburban America, but they have been purposely left out of the sort of the underwriting and the support with resources from federal and state, you know, authorities and civic planners, and it perpetuates itself in a variety of pathologies that you see, where you end up, as Ali was saying just a moment ago, like the kids growing up feel like they have so few options, right? That are available to them.
I think one of the things that really resonates even today, how many years has it been since 1991? More than 30 years, right? That still makes this film resonate in Universal is the topic of gentrification. I think that's like one of the you know, top ones that are out there. The idea of this outsider, wealthier force coming in, preying upon Black communities or other minorities, right? They actually do show the Latino community and then mention a little bit about the Asian community here as well in the film. The interesting thing for me about this is about it's foreshadowing. You know how sometimes they say, this movie predicts the future. Oh, it tells what really happens. Okay, this earthquake happened 3 years before. It happened in this exact same place after that, whatever that is, right? So it's really amazing to actually have this film foreshadow, especially with that scene with Furious Styles telling the kids about, you know, gentrification. The billboard scene is what I call it. Is still resonates with me today. It's really interesting. And I think the typical thing with this, it just reminded me of Harlem, reminded me of, I don't know, Brooklyn or even Oakland in the West Coast.
Absolutely, yeah. You go to Brooklyn, and I remember riding through Brooklyn. There were some neighborhoods. I used to call that neighborhood Duck Down because you really felt like you had a duck down. But now, East New York. Yeah, East New York. Yeah, now it looks completely different. But yeah, we definitely touched on this last topic, which was education, and we saw some of that with the SAT and et cetera. So how is education depicted as a means for escaping the community struggles? How realistic is this portrayal given the character situations?
I personally believe that the characters who really survived from this had something to do with education, like Trey's character. Ricky was so close to it. He took SAT, and we've seen the score he's got and what really unfortunately happened. And Furious Styles, I'm not sure about his education level in the film that was portrayed, but they kept saying how much he's reading. So that's part of, they kept saying like he reads a lot. Your dad is deep. Your dad, is he a preacher or something? Right? They were talking about all of those things. I kind of see that again back to the idea, I guess, as I look at it from a filmmaker perspective as well, I guess the character establishment, the character traits of these, iconic ones in this film, and those two have a lot to do with education. That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
So, this is a tough one for me. I hope I don't sound like I have some sort of problem with self-loathing as a professor myself, but I tell my students, don't ever let their schooling get in the way of their education. I'm at this. I myself am particularly at a moment where, and I'll try to keep focused on the movie. You watch this movie, and education becomes this magic wand, in which only Trey is the only character that is able to access it, and ideally he lives happily ever after. And I think that kind of sort of societal norm born from this neoliberalism, if everybody could just educate, then we can just let the market do its thing, and you work hard and you succeed. And I don't know about the rest of you, but it's just, I'm at a particular moment where I'm like, yes, Trey succeeds. And that's the story that my college is going to slap up on the front of their catalog. What about Doughboy? What about Chris? I feel that we have left whole swaths of our population behind by this overemphasis on higher ed in our society over the last 3 to 4 decades in particular, that leaves so many people alienated and creates this level of stratification between the educated and the uneducated that drives a lot of the polarity that I think we're seeing in our society. So that's not to say I don't believe what the work I do as a professor is important, but I think we need more dynamic approaches to addressing social inequality other than go to college. And so I was kind of struck by that watching that movie.
That's a word. I wanted to find a way to work this in somehow, but John Singleton wrote the screenplay for Boyz N the Hood as his senior thesis project when he was going to USC. Of course, got an A+ on it, and then got funding. It's so. I mean, you can even see this is John, an educated black man who was straight out of Compton. Oh man, he was straight out of Compton. Not intentional, but he was in them streets, and I think that was his way of saying that, education, look where it gets you. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a side of it where it's what about those who, like me? I was never a great student. I'm blessed, and I made it, through college and everything like that. But I can certainly say that's not what defines me. obviously art was kind of where I had my calling, which you can't always teach art. And I mean, you look at this movie, and I would say the standout. Well, I mean, there's multiple standouts, but it's artists. It's Cuba Gooding Jr., a young Cuba Gooding Jr. Ice Cube, who had never acted a day in his life, who is now doing all kinds of crazy things. And so you see, even within this project where it's pushing forward this message, you can see how art being used within it, and artists, just doing their thing, how it has become this creator thing. So I think that's interesting.
I just would like to add one thing. Like, I think times are different. Things are really different in terms of, I guess the film resonates with them, but the situation with Doughboy or even Ricky or the others, I think has also a lot to do, in my opinion, with the masculinity and then the absence of, I guess, role models, like male role models around these subjects, which would give them less avenues to go for whatever you want to call that success. And for those times, I guess going to college or reading or being out there would be one of those avenues where these other characters didn't have that chance to actually go through. So I personally think that it has a lot to do with their surroundings, their family structures, and the idea of masculinity.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, for Ricky's character, who almost made it out, I mean, his option is sports. That was his outlet. And, that happens a lot in these situations in inner cities as well. So I don't necessarily have any more questions. I just want to see if anyone has any final thoughts on the film that you'd like to share with the audience.
I'll throw in a bit that I find a great contrast between early hip hop films from New York, like Wild Style, Crush Groove, and even Juice to a degree, is that in those movies, hip hop is this like alternative to violence. It's alternative to poverty. It's like this, build your skills, become Juice, become this great DJ, and there's this opportunity for you. And in some ways, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture of it, but in some ways, a lot of like the Bronx movement around hip hop was like, we gotta stop gangbanging and put it into this culture, create opportunity for us. So the West Coast is on some different shit, like it has a very different way to orient itself to hip hop. And you can see some of that in Breakin'. I think when you guys show that in February, it tends to always have seen, oh, this is a way to make money, and blow up. And then what you see in this movie for the first time that I know, I think it's much better representation of colors, is that hip hop and sort of gangbanging are like inseparable. It's the soundtrack. Like, what struck me was the hip hop was like hip hop beats and like classic songs, Jam on It or Bounce to the Ounce, Cube's records, Too Short's records. They're all playing in the background when this is going on. So it's like, it's a part of this larger sort of meditation that Singleton's having on the violence and that he's seeing. So it's just a different take, in my opinion. I think it's striking in that regard as a hip hop movie.
I mean, for me, I'm going to go a little technical with this, but if there's one thing that makes this film really different than the others, in my opinion, with hip hop movement, it's the use of sound in the film. It's almost like two characters are talking. There's always the hip hop music in the background. What? Did you say something about it? What's going on? Right? And with this 4K experience, it was a little different experience for me here as well, especially with the sound, like gunshots and a couple of things really shook me up. Helicopter, right? Constant helicopter sound. That's a really wise use of filmmaking from that perspective of that dark clouds that are being over these neighborhoods at all times, right? Really interesting. So I think it's a really influential film. I think what you said about the hip hop influence is really there, but not only because of that, but all the other topics that, the questions were centered around today with the idea of gang violence, gentrification, education. I think this film is really influential. Even still today, it resonates. It resonates with me, and I'm hoping with everybody.
Yeah. Another sound note I noticed was right as Ricky is about to be shot, you hear a child laughing in the background. It's very faint.
Yeah.
It's just a crazy contrast. But yeah, I mean, I just echo what y'all are saying. I mean, I think about just myself and the impact that, you know, a film like this had when I was young and just trying to figure out, like, you know, who I was and who I was going to be. And I had all these different things surrounding me, you know, like Allentown isn't Compton, but like there's still crime. There's still things that happen and you know, having a front row seat to some of that, you know, a film like this, that really obviously, you know, has become a cultural landmark. I think it's really cool just to zero in on like Compton and South Central LA and everything. Like the influential artists who have come out of there who are doing such amazing work today. I'm a huge Kendrick Lamar fan. I'm a Kendrick Lamar stan, you could say. And thinking that he came from those streets, thinking that he came from like running with Bloods and all that kind of stuff. And he's about to do the Super Bowl and he's using his resources and everything to give back. Like it's not just like fame and everything, but like conscious and talking about like just like taking care of your mental health and all these different things. It's like, you know, John Singleton, like his work, I really believe just like paved a way for young black men, even in that time and that space, who were surrounded by this stuff, to, you know, still be able to cut through it. And they use music, but, you know, there's so much other stuff that they had. And so, I mean, it's a shame that he died so young, but truly, 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 you know, just one of the great pieces of cinema that I think exists.
Yeah, I truly believe he had more in the tank. Unfortunately, we never get to see what he had in store. But on behalf of the Hip Hop Movie Club, I'd like to thank you three gentlemen for sharing your time with us and talking about our film and being a part of this event. And to the audience, if you can have a round of applause for our three panelists.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.
And thank you so much for coming out. Have a good night.